Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Tammy. Hi, Alia. Hi, Zara.
Oops, I'm on mute. Hello. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hi there.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Adam, Narsima. Welcome, Kartik, Zara. If I don't say your name, I just, it's my brain. It's not, you're not unwelcome. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how is everybody? I'll go with 5. Oh man, you're awesome, Narsima. Sweet. Sarah, whoa. I didn't see you, Raidul. Yeah, you and me are in it. I'm actually good. I'm just too busy, like too many things. I feel like I have like 2 brain cells, but they aren't anywhere near each other to rub together. 2 and only 2.
Things compartmentalize really well.
That's not the point of convergence. Well, I do want to leave a fair bit of time for Ellison. Welcome, Ellison. I just I wanted to kick off by asking, we have stuff on the calendar. Stuff will appear on the calendar as we prepare for the run up to our in-person meeting and to the NSF report. And so I don't need to fill things, but I know that I am not I am not aware of everything that people might want to discuss or have comment on. And so I wanted to leave a space for this. Hello, welcome, Ryan. It's nice to see you again.
Kind of.
Okay, it's nice to see your name. We missed the baby. Hey, Chris. Yeah, so what I was raising here was just quick responses, or shoot me and Nalia an email if there's something that you want to discuss or have feedback on. I don't need to fill a schedule because we'll come up with stuff, but I know that people are doing things that I might be unaware of. So and you might want feedback, and especially if you feel stuck, is another good time to seek feedback. I think I don't know about you, but my students like don't want to talk to me until they have a result, and sometimes that's when they need to talk to me. So if it's like, I'm not moving forward, then that is exactly the time to bring it to the group and have us bang on it.
So, Tammy, when were you planning to discuss like the video and curating it at some point? I saw the outline, by the way, which looks great in terms of each of us recording these little segments and make. I don't know if it. Yeah, were you planning to have a discussion about that at some point?
I will. I wanted to, so we have things on the agenda, and I think you're referring Narsima to the 2 outlines for NSF.
Yeah, for the report and the video, yeah.
Also going to appear a drafty agenda for the in-person meeting. So I know we had Ellison already scheduled for today. We have Kartik for next week, and I don't remember the rest. But these will be worked into the discussion. Yeah, I want everybody to come to the in-person meeting knowing what to expect. And as we get into May, everyone have some idea of how the flow is going to go to get those presentations together. So there will be open discussion on it.
Okay. Okay. Now, I just had a specific question about whether we're planning to finish recording our segment by the in-person meeting or not, just in terms of planning. For example, yeah. or not, or to be decided, that's fine.
No, not decided yet. I think so. I have less of a sense of the video presentation. What I hope to do is iterate with that.
Yeah.
This week has just been very poor for having sort of creative time. But I'm
I know you've been
hoping
super
that
busy.
well, I know, but if I keep making excuses, it won't happen. But I'm thinking a couple more rounds of digging into it. And then I'm thinking that some will be recorded, not all of it. Aaliyah's kind of itching to get to make the videos more beautiful than we're allowed to by NSF. Because they said no special effects. I'm like, what? How can we make it nice without special, or without counting special effects? And so I think Aaliyah raised the possibility of recording when we're in person. We'll see. I think we're going to iterate those two pieces and the agenda for the in-person meeting. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Yes, we need the arts. We need the arts.
That's great. That's great.
Save us.
But it would be great to get hold of those videos from NSF. I haven't heard back from the web. I wrote to the website administrator just to see a successful convergence videos. It'd be really, really nice to see. I mean, should we write to the program officer? I know they've been very unresponsive in the past, but I would really
Yeah,
like to see it.
I have not followed up on that. Can you flag that, Aaliyah, to follow up on the issue is that there have been some examples or communications from NSF and they didn't play when Narasimha and Stacy looked for them. By the way, Stacy is not going to be able to make it today. Okay, and then Narasimha, did you want to comment on that paper that you sent around? I wasn't sure if you meant for it to be discussed. There was a paper on interviews regarding energy decisions, pretty relevant to what Chris is doing. Just curious if people had
I'll just take 30 seconds because I didn't read the paper in detail myself. I just found it really, really relevant, really, really innovative, and picking up on something important that we haven't talked about. So the idea is, so they've done 120 interviews, semi-structured interviews, randomly sampled around a few states in the country. And the idea was to understand the decision-making process around home upgrades in general. And the general theme of the article is that in most of the cases, people's home upgrade decisions were tied into other decisions about changes in the house and structural changes, which seems to me so important because here I was saying, oh, think about this two-stage decision. It's not just about the payback, but it's even broader than heating equipment decision. And it makes a lot of sense if you're renovating, if you're modernizing, or you decide to do a whole bunch of things that you would think about this as well. And that broader context to me looks really, really important. And so it's the first paper I've seen that does that. And it's brand new. So I thought we should take a look at it. It may just give us ideas for what we want to do for phase 2. Really, that's the main thing I thought would be useful to look at. And especially for the qualitative researcher team, right? They can read the article with a better lens than I can in terms of understanding the research process, etc. That's all I have to say about it.
Yeah. Chris, I was curious what your reactions would be. Were you able to look at it?
Yeah, I looked at it. I didn't read it in full detail, but I did see that the article had a few overlapping features. But I think certainly our contribution will be to show how some of these changes relate, more directly to that idea of well-being, whereas the article seemed to focus a little bit more on, does this, fit with the size of my house? Does it fit with the design of my house? Is it me? These kinds of issues. Whereas ours is a little more tied to the idea of, how does this feature make me more comfortable? And there's more to it than that, of course, but I do think there are ways we can certainly use it and then add to it.
Yeah. And I think something to bring up, and something that I hinted at in drafting the report, is something that has changed since we wrote the proposal, which was a long time ago, is there's just a vast amount more attention to this field now. And our project really has had to adapt to that, right? It's very different to be the only one in a niche kind of space. And now a lot of attention to recognizing that humans are important, and just all the money that's been dumped in to the field has generated interest. And so there's going to be more people doing work like this where we think, oh my gosh, they're doing what we're doing. And as part of the convergence mission, we're going to have to think about how do we remain convergent in a field that is that active. So I think what you said, Chris, is like, we're complementary. We need to show that, and just continuing to think about it. It can't be a competition, right? It has to be a look. We're all figuring this out. So
Can I
yeah.
make one statement about that, Tammy?
Mm.
It's just I talked to you about it in this review that I've done. One of the things that I've learned is how everybody who's interested in this question, how people are making decisions, what influences them, go in with a particular lens, and their results end up being driven by the questions they ask. And so you have a bunch of different studies with a bunch of different answers from different groups, which doesn't mean that each group thought about only those issues, So now we have another paper that's asked about the linkage to other types of decisions or projects, and yet another lens. So how do you, and from a research process perspective, it's really confounding me, How do you just have a blank slate and ask people, how did you decide this?
Yeah.
No well-being, no projects, no two-stage decision, And I
Yeah.
just have no picture from the literature on that. It's really crazy.
I think that's our challenge,
Yeah.
is and I think that's the challenge of every field. And I don't want to take Ellison's time away anymore, because I think she's probably going to tell us the same thing is happening, right? So I'm eager for her demonstration of this. But it's something that you either have to rise and float on top of, right? Or you're going to get sucked under and just be like relevant to your own thing. So I think it's an interesting and worthy challenge. Okay, I'm going to give the rest of the time to Ellison. Thank you. You should be able to share if you have a presentation.
Yeah, I'm just writing one or two more things. Okay. Okay, I presented a couple of times. The focusing title that I've been using is a selective review of representations of well-being in home-based field studies. It might be expanding a little bit beyond that. We've included papers that involve data collection in the field, but we've also included papers that talk about data that would be collected in the field. And Zara's done a really great job of compiling and tabulating these papers. I think it's around 100 papers, not a whole lot. Not a lot more have been added since the last time I presented, and I'm not planning on presenting very much on the like individual papers, I guess, themselves. I think because there's a lot of different sub-teams working, I thought it might be valuable just to briefly review the basis for this literature review. Has been to compile how well-being is represented with a focus on studies that are done in homes, or that consider the residential environment when also considering well-being. There hasn't really been an efficient way to say that. We're not doing a review to understand the impact of the home environment on well-being, but rather how well-being gets represented and measured in studies that aim to understand relationships between the home environment and well-being. And the last time I presented, I think I shared the diversity of, or a few takeaways that I think I tried to share were that there's a wider range of settings represented than I might have expected. I think that spanned 20 to 30 different countries, rural and urban environments. There's probably more studies in urban settings than rural settings, but not all studies are really focusing on urbanicity as a dimension of variability. Some focus on housing tenure, some focus on housing condition. Many studies are studying the impact of the home environment on a range of outcomes, including well-being, and have, as I think had formed the basis for this review, they're not trying to develop new measures, they're just reaching for available measures that they can gather from people. And many of those measures can be self-reported or framed as perceptions. So from the bank of 100 studies, let's say roughly 100 studies, I am really just presenting a work in progress. I'm not done, and I'll present the preliminary trends that I'm seeing, but that's it. So at the risk of showing you a small text on a screen, but just I have had trouble trying to figure out how to go through each study. So what you're looking at on the left-hand side are domains of well-being, largely informed by the conceptual approaches for well-being in built environments, and then sub-themes. And I'll see if it's any easier. It's not really that much easier to read off of here. I'd rather represent them all than break them up over several slides, but the domains are hedonic and eudaimonic well-being, social well-being, mental and physical health, environmental satisfaction, and productivity and cognitive performance. Those are domains through which well-being could be represented. And then in the right-hand column are sub-themes within those domains. So within hedonic or subjective well-being, there is positive affect, satisfaction, happiness. Within mental health right now, we just have stress, anxiety, psychological distress, and psychological states and traits as an example. So with this filter, effectively, I have been going through, where'd it go? Each set of studies by year. Each the rows here represent, or the row here is for a year. So in 2023, it's terrible. 2023, there are 10 studies. 2022, there's 13 studies. 2021, there are 8 studies, etc. This is just a way to systematize going through the studies. I don't really think there's a lot to be, or I'm not really intending to do very much analysis by year of when the paper was published. I don't know that that necessarily reflects, I don't know, it could reflect something like increase in popularity of the topic, but I don't think that's a major aim of what we're trying to do. Somewhat independently, and I think this is healthy for a good review process, Zara's been reading these papers and aiming to identify the well-being measures that are used in each paper. At the same time, I'm going through each paper and giving it a 1 or a 0 for any of these features or ways of measuring well-being that are represented. It's not a perfect way of going about this, but I really feel like I need to do this first, and then if there's a way to improve on it, then I could go back through and do that. So I've only gotten through 2023 to 2020, moving backwards. Our search criteria restricted analysis or sorry, restricted the search to 2000 to 2023, and we've included some papers from 2024. I think it's just because it's continued into 2024. And so on the basis of those first 2 years, blue is 2023, red is 2022, and yellow is 2021. I haven't gotten through that yet, but it's that's why the legend has those 3 colors. I'm showing percentage of studies that include that measure, and the measure is represented on the x-axis here. The y-axis is 0 to 1. So if the bar reaches the top, that means 100% of the studies in that year represented well-being with that measure. And I know it can be frustrating to not be able to read the x-axis. I'm not able to, I didn't have time to get that ready. But what I think I've tried to highlight here, see if I can maybe change it a little bit. This far left 3 bars are positive affect, satisfaction, and happiness. There's almost no studies that have mentioned measures of eudaimonic well-being, so that's why there's nothing for sense of purpose, autonomy, or personal growth. Then you see sort of another pulse of 4 columns in the middle, both in 2023 and 2022, are using stress, anxiety, psychological distress as measures of well-being in about 50% of studies in that year. And then what I didn't have time to make as a text box over here, this other pulse is indoor environmental quality, building design and facilities, comfort, thermal comfort, and satisfaction in physical conditions, which seems to be showing up in terms of like measures that are represented in those subdomains in, you know, anywhere from 50 to 80% of the studies in that year. So by the time we've completed this analysis, I don't really intend to present it as a year-over-year analysis, at least initially, but I just wanted you to get a sense of kind of what we're getting back as results. And that's all I have.
Ellison Narsima's hand is up.
Okay, Narsim.
Hey, thanks, Ellison. That's really interesting. I had a question. You know, when we're talking about the motivation of this, you were saying how a lot of people are misusing the term well-being, and they're calling things that are not really well-being, they're calling it well-being. So I was wondering if because here you're keeping track of what would legitimately be a well-being interpretation or indicator. I'm wondering if you were thinking about trying to pick up, you know, things that are not actually well-being that they're calling well-being, or maybe you just meant they're looking at physical indicators like thermal comfort and set points and calling that well-being. But I was just curious, besides the ones on the right-hand side of this graph, if there were such things, you know, misnomers that you're trying to systematically pick up.
Yeah, I think that's that would be, I think, a next stage. Right now, Tammy has been working on a section for the introduction, or maybe it would be in the methods, or maybe it would be in a section that I don't know what to call it yet, but that would sort of get at what would be more coherent terminology to talk about. Like, I think we struggled to even name like the classification levels. Like, we talk about domains and aspects and themes and subthings and indicators and needs and satisfiers. So there's a lot of different nouns that are used to sort of signal at classification systems, but because there isn't homogeneity in those, I think what Tammy's been working on, which I didn't have a chance to read. Tammy, I know you sent me something, but I didn't read it. So that would be one way, I think, of addressing this on the front end, in terms of if we had a better set of filters through which to filter the data that are in the papers. But in the absence of having that filter and wanting to make some progress, I use what I would call an available filter, which is like these list of things. And in the process, I think a next step would be to take whatever, which for any one study that has a measure that shows up in that bin, to maybe rate it as like in a binary way, I think, like appropriate or inappropriate, or I don't know, that sounds a little bit aggressive and judgmental, but I think that would be the idea in Narcima. I mean, honestly, there's so much diversity in how they're written about. I think these are the ones that are maybe the most common type, or maybe not the most, but this kind of language shows up regularly. So whether or not the measure is actually this thing, is maybe the second, another phase of analysis, maybe not second, but another phase of analysis, but it's just not something that I've been able to do yet.
Yeah, that's fine. No, it could be that that's not important anymore to focus on. I just was curious.
No, I think it is. I don't think there's a way to get to it without first, at least starting with what people are saying they're doing in their studies.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
And
and
then later applying a grading system. I think we would have to just make that up ourselves, though, which, I think we could do, but it doesn't seem to exist.
so if I could comment a little bit on what I've been trying to do. Narcima, I wanted your comment on it, and I feel like there's one section more that I need to write, and then I'm gonna show it to you. But especially because of your prior work. And so then a little deviation for those of you who aren't aware, Narcima has done a bunch of work on decent living standards and identifying maybe thresholds of what could contribute to certain aspects of well-being, as well as thinking about the mapping between this broad thing that we call well-being and what you can measure. And so what I've been working on is I've really struggled to describe how people who speak of well-being framings, and there are a bunch of different frameworks. We're not going to invent a new one. There's so many of them, and people have their desires and like which ones are better. And I don't think we should get into that. But I felt a huge disconnect when I look at people who say they're measuring well-being and they measure a couple of indicators. And then you look at the frameworks of well-being and it's like, okay, where does this even fit? I guess it's maybe in this category, but I don't really know. And so the thing I'm trying to write is, how do we consider a mapping between the kind of work that Ellison is doing and these broad well-being frameworks? And the part I'm struggling through right now is I think people talk about well-being when they really mean, well, I measured one thing and it wasn't enough, right? Or we observed one thing and then we saw all these unintended consequences. And so we have to count other things too. But then they go and they pick like another couple of things because they're like, look, we're being holistic, but then just because you add more things does not mean that you're being holistic, right? It just it might mean that you're doing a little better, but it doesn't really give you the stamp of being holistic or comprehensive. And so what I'm trying to fight through right now is how would you do that? And how would you create a mapping between what people measure? Because those things are evoking things in researchers, right? That somebody decided, oh, this is really important, I should do a study on it. And yet when you look at what the average individual or what philosophers think of well-being, it's like, that's not the things they said to measure, or maybe not the things. And so I came to sort of a preliminary proposal for how to do it. I feel very much like not being judgmental, like, oh, you did it wrong, that's not really well-being. But more like, okay, here's how your framing would fit, and you did or did not cover many of the things you were seeking, or you tapped into this other thing. And so I was hoping to have that done. I arbitrarily set Ellison's presentation as a goal, and I have written part of it, which describes sort of a framing of how to connect indicators and well-being. But then how to tell when you've been comprehensive enough is another matter. One of the things I ran into is that things that people consider well-being, especially with regard to environmental influence, tend not to be represented at the high level in representations of well-being. So a lot of stuff that public health people worry about, like clean water and, not breathing air pollution, is like, you would sort of glom it under bodily health, right? And so there's like a huge number of indicators that would just be subsumed under that bodily health fraction of well-being. And so how do we, you have to, because we have all different aspects of health, and yet somehow we keep talking about well-being without acknowledging that the sort of proliferation of indicators. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to get my head around. And when I have something slightly less drafty, I intend to share it so that people can throw darts at it. And I hope that line of thinking will connect to Kartik's work as well, which we're going to see next week. So I don't know, and I'm concerned that it's getting too long, and I don't want it to be like a giant lump in the middle of Ellison's paper, so I don't know what to do with it either.
Well, I don't think we know where this paper would be going anyway, so I'm not sure what too long is.
Hey, Ellison, I have a couple of questions.
Mhm.
Just curious, like, how would you characterize the themes of the papers you've chosen? Like, are those primarily around like decision making, or are they just, sort of just characterizing well-being in the house? Like, just wondering would you like make different clusters of the papers you've been reading, or?
I don't know that I've been clustering on paper focus. They had to meet our criteria of addressing, proposing or implementing measures of well-being when the focus is on the home environment. So we didn't even consider, there are a few papers in the bank of papers, but I've ignored them for now because I don't think they actually relate to what I was trying to stay focused on, which is not energy in the home. So there's some papers that want to know about perceptions of well-being in homes that are involved in an energy efficiency program, as an example. And that really doesn't represent anything about the home in those studies. There's like one or two that I've found so far. So those are not in the review. They had to be focused on the home or housing conditions and well-being. I'd say a lot of the studies are are an impact evaluation.
Mhm.
Like most of them are like doing the work. They're not trying to develop ways of thinking about well-being in the home. There are some reviews. I think about 10% of the papers are a systematic review type paper, but of those, about, you know, I'll just say roughly like half are systematic reviews of the impact of indoor air quality on well-being in the home. So they're not even about well-being. They're just taking whatever was in a study and look, you know, and they compile like 20 studies that looked at the impact of IQ on well-being, and then that's probably exaggerated, but and what they're trying to evaluate is the actual impact, like in a meta-analysis type of approach. And then a large number of studies are specific to a project or a setting, like perceptions of subjective well-being and housing in the English Housing Survey as like a study, or measures of subjective well-being in low-income housing in parts of India with a focus on natural ventilation, like another example. So a lot of them are like studying a particular context and looking at well-being as an impact, and then from there having to make decisions about how to represent well-being in their study. And that's what we've been trying to extract.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. And another follow-up, this is probably what Tammy was talking about earlier too. So when you say well-being, were you like mostly focused on subjective well-being, or would you be ultimately making connection between, you know, objective well-being metrics and subjective well-being metrics? Is that a theme that trying to like dig towards, or yeah, just curious how you're thinking about this?
I think anytime the researchers have said they're studying well-being, we've accepted that at face value. I think that sort of gets at Narsima's question. We're not deciding whether or not they are actually studying well-being. If they said they're studying well-being, then they are. And then we're trying to learn, what do they call that, or how do they measure well-being? And that, I think that's, again, to Narasima's point, I think we should dig in on, you know, how many times was well-being represented as like a holistic thing, when in fact the only thing being measured was, you know, level of anxiety as reported by the person. So that happens. But I don't, at this point, I just don't think I have anything to show on that, because first we're just trying to figure out, okay, this study said that they were studying well-being, and then what did they say they were studying? Because they usually say something more than just well-being. They have to say what they measured. They don't ask people, how's your well-being? Nobody's done that, you know, but they do ask people things like questions about their subjective well-being. And so a fair number of studies name it that, like they say they're studying subjective well-being, and then others say they're studying mental health. And then that's why what I showed, I think, is maybe won't hold up over time. I haven't gone back, or I haven't like gotten through all the studies, maybe only gotten through 20%. But the initial trends is that if a study says it's measuring well-being, then a lot of those studies are measuring positive affect, satisfaction, quality of life, and or stress, anxiety, psychological distress, and or indoor environmental quality and climate. There's almost no studies that have looked at like assessment of personal growth or assessment of autonomy with respect to the home environment.
I
There are
see.
studies that
How-
look at
Mhm.
renters, like housing tenure, but they just presume a level of autonomy. They don't ask about it. They just say, we're studying subjective well-being in light of rentership. So they're not asking questions about level of autonomy or personal growth. Or so far, we're not, I mean, I'm not saying this is not in the data set, but that's the initial. Does that get at your question?
Right, to some extent. And then how about, do people measure more objective things like, energy consumption, or if you're spending more than, I don't know, 30% of your income on rent? So that's not type of well-being metric. That's not subjective, but sort of gets to it. So do you see any of those being measured or not really?
Yeah, I'd say interestingly, I'm not seeing a lot of financial measures. But in part, I wonder if this is imposed by the limits of doing field-based work where you go to a particular place and you have to select it. And so there are studies that are like in the same way with autonomy. I feel like autonomy or control and then financial status is like, that's the inclusion or exclusion criteria. You're a renter, so you're in our study. Now I'm not looking at variability in autonomy and control, or I'm not asking about it. It could be there, but it's not being asked about. Same thing like housing affordability, but then they're just looking at public housing or low-income residents or people that say they can't afford. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but the criteria eliminates variability on that dimension.
I see. Okay, yeah. I think that answers my question. Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, there are a few review papers that Zara and I have separated out that mention financial, like affordability of housing as an important factor, or affordability of energy. Energy has not been a major focus of this review, maybe as a limit, but I think there'd just be too many papers.
I had to follow up if nobody else does, but I want to wait because
Well, you have to go, so go ahead.
that's true. I have to go. Ellison, so I heard you say it. So this is an international review. You looked at studies in other countries too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's great. You mentioning IAQ a lot. It's a lot of the studies are about indoor air quality. Are you seeing studies that are about home improvements generally, upgrades, and the impacts? Because you say it's a lot of impact assessment. Are they looking at impact assessments of home upgrades of any kind? You think that's a subset?
I think it's a subset, just scanning the titles. Interestingly, in the first two, I don't know, Zara, if you feel like they show up more. They're not showing up. No, it's a good question.
I'm only curious because just looking at again avenues for overlap and integration, so I'm looking at decision making around home upgrades. If you have different studies that are looking at home upgrades with a different lens, it'll be kind of interesting to compare, as in terms of this idea of different research questions leading to different sets of information.
Yeah.
Maybe we can, at some point, we can do a search to see if if we can, how many articles show up, and is there an overlap with what I'm looking at? I'm wondering. At some later stage, we can ask that.
Yeah, I do think the context of upgrades is brought up, but I haven't come across any that have had a strong study design that was evaluating a measure of well-being in a robust intervention assessment framework. It seems like there have been a few studies that have looked at measures of well-being and housing condition in the context of changes that were made, but not they're not studying the effect of that change on the well-being measure. To me, it looks like they added to a survey questions around well-being and then looked at just more descriptive variability in that outcome measure.
Hmm.
But yeah, making me wonder if we're missing, like why we missed those studies.
I mean, it may be that those home upgrade studies are not at all looking at anything close to well-being, so they don't show up when you filter on well-being
Yeah,
criteria.
or that if they've been done, maybe they just never got published or something. Because I feel like the measures of like measuring well-being is mentioned in white papers, like what is the one that Aaron Rose is a part of, Tammy? Like E for the future, I think.
I don't know about that.
Okay, there's some documentation from like the 2018, 2019, 2020 around home energy efficiency upgrades in the US, like weatherization program.
Oh yeah, I saw that paper with Aaron. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they in there they mention well-being, but I feel like those are more like position papers. In terms of people actually doing it in the field, if I suspect there are people doing it, but they might not be people that would typically publish. Like Aaron Rose maybe, and like people that she might intersect with. Maybe they're asking questions around well-being, but I don't know that it's like risen to the level of this. It hasn't made it into our review database, but
Yeah, we could just ask her.
Yeah.
I think
Find-
what you're not finding can be just as important as what you are finding. So when
Right, yeah.
when you have the tabulation together, and I think you have in some of your notes on the paper, like what surprised me. And I think, maybe there's another way of framing that, but like what we did not find, but it's mentioned in white papers or that kind of thing. I think that disconnect is also important to bring out.
Yeah. So I mean, to me, at least the initial plot that I was making, I think it's the gaps as well as the what's showing up. Yeah, that is worth highlighting.
I just wanted to give you and Zara a chance to tell the group like what Zara's role has been in this, because you presented a lot of it. I know Zara's done a lot of reading and classification. So you're sitting there quietly, Zara, but do you want to say something about mainly what you've been doing to contribute to this?
Exactly. I searched for the paper based on the Dr. Carter's list of keywords and extracted the papers that match the objective of this review, and also extracted the measures of well-being. And in about that consideration, Dr. Rao asks, something comes in my mind that there weren't any paper that come up with this keywords exactly consider the retrofits and well-being before and after the retrofits. There were couples of paper that consider retrofits but didn't study what impacts that retrofits might have on the well-being. And
I thought the weatherization assessment at least did like before and after thermal comfort or set point or something. I don't remember. And I'm not sure if how much of that got published in the peer-reviewed literature either.
That's what I'm wondering, Tammy, is yeah, things that I guess I've been exposed to through conferences and workshops, but didn't seem to show up in this with the search terms we used. We could revisit those, Zara, maybe to see if there's some things that we identify that are missing, but you've done an incredible job already extracting the specifics around how well-being's measured in these 100+ papers, which is a lot.
Yeah, and I think like what I know from some of the physical principles around housing is just a lot of it is embedded in the practitioner space.
Yeah.
And then they're like, why bother? You know, they don't, who cares? Nobody's gonna read it. And so what biases might we have by doing a classical literature review?
Yeah, and I think that Tammy had suggested maybe a positionality statement. Maybe that's part of that statement. That the reviews sort of
That's
focus
fair,
on peer-reviewed literature. And as a result, likely misses out on a lot of practitioner communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good, I don't know, it's not something we can discuss in the remaining 0 minutes, but people talk about community engaged research as if like research is a thing that you do and then you go and you engage a community in it, and it's like the community never thought about this before, and so you bring them in. But like, you know, it Paul and Whitney and Will and Misa just got back from HPC where there's like thousands of people and hundreds of sessions that is just not communicated to the academic community, or there's very little porosity between the two communities. And like that's not really community engaged. It's just like you know you're you're missed, or that somehow that boundary is so is so hard to cross that our definitions aren't even good to describe what needs to be done. Anyway, yeah. Food for thought. Ellison, what do you need from us to move this forward? How can the group help you?
I think the questions that I got were helpful. I think, Zara, I think this helped me think through what we would do next with the well-being measures that you've extracted. Maybe the next time we meet, we could think about a rating system. I don't think I want it to be very complex, maybe just like a binary thing.
We can talk about, yeah, what rating means and like why would it be useful, and then like
Yeah.
what's our goal. So I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, I don't know that I have an ask for the group. I'm maybe hesitant to even call it a rating system. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think earlier on I might have been a bit more likely to say like somebody had selected a measure that isn't measuring well-being, but I think all the research in this space seems motivated to understand things that influence well-being, and nothing has come up as like that doesn't influence well-being, but I'm not sure there are many things that don't. So, and it seems inappropriate to come away with guidance that says like you should be doing this in a really robust and comprehensive way when that's just not feasible at all.
It's not how people do it. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not maybe that's the point of a review. I think it's tempered some of the criticism that I had, and maybe more just like, I don't know, acquiesce to the diversity of ways that people think. Even just one place in life, the home, contributes to well-being. I do think the things that don't show up are interesting. That's probably the or what I think is the most interesting right now.
Ellison, I'm curious. I know we only got a minute or two,
Yeah.
but have you seen any I didn't comment on this or not, but I guess what's the justification that you're seeing in terms of why people chose the indicators they chose? I mean, I know you and I have talked about this a little bit before, but there's just so many ways to measure well-being and so many different things you could do in a survey. You obviously can't do it all. I wonder if
Yeah.
you've seen just any kind of more qualitatively seen patterns where people say, we chose this for this reason,
Yeah.
or does that kind of make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. In fact, that's one of the reasons I was retabulating things, Zara, with like the journal name, because I do want to do an analysis that shows the disciplines represented in the author list relative to the measures used, because I think the quickest way to answer your question, Adam, is that those with a hammer are using nails and those with a drill are using screw, like, and I don't know if we should fault them. Like, I don't know, I'm coming away a little bit more, feel like in past, maybe not more or anything. I think in the past, I've been more disappointed in the field. I'm like, in the multiplicity of fields that try to represent well-being, but they don't really, reading through more of their intros, they're motivated to understand how something that they work on, like lighting in an architectural space or ventilation, makes people's lives better. And so they grasp for things to measure that are on a mechanistic pathway that they come up with. That's
Mhm.
not indefensible, but isn't really, established. Like, we don't know where feeling a draftiness in your home influences your well-being. And I'm not even sure it matters to go after answering that question. Like, it shouldn't launch a multi-million-dollar research program to figure that out, in my opinion. So I think what people are measuring is generally what the frame on which they're like looking at well-being. And then they add in a few things that they can ask in a survey, which is why I think the hedonic measures are the most common to see added, because you can just put them on a survey.
Yeah, I suspect it's also an issue too, right? There are practical limitations to how many questions you can ask, and some aspects of well-being might take a huge chunk of your survey. And
Yeah.
so maybe, there's just that practical issue. You're probably not going to see that written in a paper, but maybe.
Yeah, I think you'd have to look at like the hashtag overly honest methods and hope that some well-being researchers have said why they did stuff. But yeah, I think it seems like people are mostly measuring what they can measure.
Mhm.
I think one challenge for the field in general is how do you acknowledge that that well-being is or that influences outcomes may be quite complex, and that you would like to acknowledge that complexity, you want to recognize that, right? And so yeah, I'm not going to say, well, you need to measure everything with the 500 question survey that nobody will answer to capture everything that's going to be influenced, because that's the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Then you will not get good results, right? So it doesn't matter if you make it comprehensive. And yet, how do you continue acknowledging that the complexity does exist, right? How do you avoid the oversimplification?
Mhm.
Okay, I've got to close down. Thank you, Ellison. Thanks for bringing this forward, and looking forward to working on it more.
Same. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, thank you.